we also know that there's a lot of student supports folks, program directors and things. So we would just love you to tell me your position and your CIS affiliate or organization in the chat right now. And we can kind of scan through while I'm doing some intros. And then we're also trying to get a pulse on how you're feeling about standards. You might have heard things, you might have not heard things. All that's okay. And so on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being very worried and 1 not being at all worried, where are you as far as what you've heard or not heard about the accreditation standards? So please say hello. Good morning. We got Robeson, Tatum, Wake. Great, great, great. Keep on coming in as we are great. Kind of moving on. So Kevin, do you want to move to the next slide? We'll kind of just monitor the chat as we continue forward. So Heather already introduced us, but this is who we are when we're out and about post-COVID life. My name is Julie Dennis. I'm the Senior Program Manager of Accreditation. I have been with CIS National for 5 years, so that's why I know a lot of the EDs that have gone through what we call TQS 2.0. So welcome. And then Kevin just joined my team. I'm so thrilled in February. And it's been wonderful to have him. And he is joining you from, he will say, beautiful, sunny. Is it sunny there, Kevin?
It's always sunny in Akron, Ohio.
That's the right response, exactly. So anyway, we're going to chat with you about accreditation and more specifically about risk, which was obviously the title of the presentation. So first of all, we want everybody to take a really big breath, deep breath here, because first of all, the standards will not go into effect for this school year, the 21-22 school year. So they're not in effect. In fact, one of the things that I've been mentioning is that similar to last year during the pandemic, we actually have some guidance this year, just because of pandemic life, about saturation, about, grabbing parent consent and things like that, that we've been passing out from national to all of our affiliates. So there's actually there's some very waivers in effect for this year, and ergo, the standards that we're talking about today will not be in effect. We are not going to have a reaccreditation cohort until the summer of 23. So I always have to remind myself, what year is it? It's, fall of 2021. So that's essentially about 2 years from now, we'll be putting our first reaccreditation cohort through this new reaccreditation cycle. And as we alluded to, as I mentioned in the title of this presentation, we are moving away from this quality. We'll talk a little bit about TQS, and the Q and T in the TQS is quality, and we're moving toward risk mitigation. And so we are actually getting rid of what we call TQS standards, and we're talking about accreditation standards. And so these are the standards that we'll be mentioning today. And then finally, I mentioned that cohort that won't be starting until 2023, but we used to have 3-year cycles and we're moving to 5-year cycles. So that's another change that's coming down the line, and we'll kind of discuss that and obviously answer any questions that you have as we continue through the presentation. But those are the big picture things. So if you were super nervous, if you were like really stressed out, we hope that that this first slide is calming you down a little bit. So I just want to briefly talk about this very potentially laborious for some of you path that you have been on with TQS. So as you know, we had TQS 1.0 that was everybody had to be accredited under 1.0 or reaccredited under 1.0 by July. But July 1st of 2015, and that's because we released what we call 2.0 student support standards and business standards in July of 2015 and January of 2016, respectively. And we set you all up on a 3-year cycle. So we had 17, 18, and 19 cohorts. And you can see that those due dates were in June of 17 and 18 for the first 2 cohorts. And for those of you who have been with CIS, know that we got a new CEO and president in late November of 16, early 17, that started a 5-year strategic plan at the beginning of or the end of the 2017, beginning of 2018 calendar year. And because of that, we actually paused for what we call recalibration with TQS, and that shifted the due date of our 2019 cohort back till October. And essentially when we recalibrated and when we entered into this 5-year strategic plan, the entire point of looking at the plan was, is what we're doing what we want to be doing, right, with a strategic plan. And we realized that TQS at that time wasn't really aligning with the strategic initiatives, and ergo, that's why we recalibrated, because we wanted to better align it. And also during the course of that time, and with finishing up the 17, 18, 19 cohorts, we realized that we were not, as I've alluded, we were not really doing a good job of measuring quality. The Q and TQS was not really working out for us. And so what is accreditation supposed to be doing? So we kind of meditated a lot on this, actually, about what is the purpose of accreditation. And we've come up with this answer, or what we think the answer is right now, which is accreditation is about mitigating risk. And so because of that, we actually decided to put through everyone under what we call, again, TQS 2.0, everyone being reaccredited in the spring, by spring of 2021, so that we could be working toward, rolling out this new accreditation process. And so here we are. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the process entails, as it began last summer of 2020, as well as kind of, again, why we are thinking that why we are moving from quality to risk. So go ahead with the next slide. And so this is, I think, very indicative of why we need to make that change. So you can see here all the different cohorts. So 17, 18, 19 were the traditional 3-year cohort. We had some folks in 20 that might have gotten accredited a little bit later in 17, and we always reaccredit after 3 full school years. So we just had a few, and this is specifically North Carolina too, by the way, just in case you're like, these numbers are very low. So you can see here that the number who participated in reaccreditation and the number that was reaccredited or accredited is not the same. And you would think that something that was measuring quality would be able to capture when affiliates were struggling, right? When affiliates were not essentially keeping up with some quality measures, and be able to kind of be used to help that affiliate through what potentially was a difficult time in their life cycle. And we're not finding that to be the case. And so we're having affiliates really struggling, but we don't know that they're struggling, because at the time we were only looking at them once every 3 years. And so we realized that this is not helpful for all of you, and this is not helpful for us as national supporting you. We can't support you if we don't know what's going on. So that's another reason why we are kind of moving toward what we'll talk about in a little bit about a risk assessment, as well as, again, really thinking about how can we better support you more in a continuous space, as opposed to just at these touch points every 3 or 5 years. So we are redefining the accreditation objectives, again, with that 5-year strategic plan, which we are currently entering our final year of under Ray Saldana's leadership now. We want to make sure we're protecting students we serve, their security and safety, ensuring fidelity to the model across all of our affiliated organizations, protecting our CAS brand, addressing operational financial risk of CS affiliated organizations, and ensuring legal compliance and the adoption of ethical standards. So those are kind of the objectives, and so that's what we're going to be focusing on moving forward with accreditation. So let's talk a little bit about process, because I kind of mentioned it a little bit in that slide that was the long and winding road. But this process actually started with recalibrating the standards last summer. So can you go to the next? Oh, perfect. Yes. So we got a small working group together. You will learn more about them a little bit later on, because this working group, fun Saturday activity, just throwing it out there if anyone's ever bored, rank the standards from highest risk to lowest risk, because that's what this working group did. And we use those answers to inform our annual risk management assessment, or what we were calling ARMA. And so that working group was very instrumental in helping us think through the standards. And if you're like, who is on this working group? It was a lot of state leadership, as well as some affiliate leadership where there aren't state networks or state offices, I should say. We also then wanted to take the standards in front of our DEI committee. This committee reviewed the standards with the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is the committee that's made up of both national and network leadership. So they really looked at both the business standards and the student support standards. And then finally, we took a TQS survey to our executive directors in the network, and we said, what are your pain points with TQS, with what we're calling this now? And what can we do to improve? And so we really leaned into a lot of network leadership to gain some insight there. And so that was really helpful. And that went out in March of this year. So that's kind of the work that we've done. And these are some of the results. So the DEI committee said that DEI can be better infused throughout the standards, and we agree. And we think that all of you agree because the DEI committee is actually made up of national and network leadership. And so the result there is that the DEI committee has and we've accepted changes that a belief statement will now be required in several standards. So again, the DEI committee looked at each standard. Does this standard hinder, help, or is neutral toward DEI? And they said that the belief statement should be put into these standards. So you'll see most of them are business standards, bylaws and board policies, service provider engagement procedures. There is the consent form, which is the student support standard, which we'll actually talk about in a moment. And so that's kind of the change that the DEI committee has had on the standards. So we had that survey, and the network said there are too many standards. Strongly agree. Oh, I cut off the thing. Sorry. The 57% and 14% together is how many either agreed or strongly agreed with the fact that there are too many standards. And so because of that, we've moved now from 38 business standards to 31, 20 student support standards to 16. And you'll notice if you look at the standards that they look different. It used to be a vertical display with the standard and indicator, and now it's a horizontal display with an additional column for promising practices with yellow highlights showing changes to standards and green highlights linked to resources. And we'll talk about what is a promising practice momentarily. So let's kind of dive into the standards. So for the purposes of this presentation, just to focus on, to let you know kind of what we've been doing as far as process, since we just wrapped that up. So we've been doing these little meetings with a lot of state networks. So executive directors in the North Carolina state actually received this presentation about a month ago. We also did this presentation for Leadership Town Hall, but we've been taking this leadership presentation quote on the road, end quote, because obviously we're all in our houses. So we presented this to a lot of state offices and executive directors in state networks. So because of that, and because we presented to EDs a month ago, we really wanted to focus this presentation on more of the student support side. So we're going to be focusing the standard changes on the student support standards. So model implementation requirements. So we have two requirements that are not standards, but they are very much informed by standards. The first one is 51% of your budget. We're not even going to talk about that today. But the second one is CAS model schools. And the CAS model schools say that when you go through reaccreditation, you must have 2 or 20%, whichever is greater, meeting all 16, used to be 20, student supports standards. And you'll notice that the 20%, or whichever is greater, is highlighted in yellow. That's because it's new. When we went through reaccreditation under TQS 2.0, we realized that to make it 2 for some affiliates, that was, maybe they only have 4 schools in their entire affiliate. But for some other affiliates in our network who have potentially 100 schools, that wasn't very equitable, which is why we moved it to 2 or 20%, whichever is greater. The other key important thing to remember about the CAS model implementation is that this is strictly during your reaccreditation year. So yes, of course, we want to encourage you to always be implementing the model with fidelity, but these requirements are very explicit to the reaccreditation process. And so the indicator there is that we would look at some data points in the system, and we would look at the student support standard documents that you've provided during your reaccreditation year to determine if you've met this requirement. So that's that. So site coordinator, so CIS has a paid designated staff on site, one or more people contributing to a total of at least 32 hours per week per school, responsible for ensuring all aspects of the annual school support plan are implemented as designed. So the first part, as you see, is highlighted because it is a change in the standard. So we used to require 0.5 FTE. And now we are requiring 32 hours, which but I believe the federal government, that's the federal government's definition of full-time. And so we are making that change. And why are we making that change? Because we have heard from our network that it is very difficult to implement the model with fidelity when a site coordinator is only at that school for 20 hours a week. And so we are encouraging and requiring our network to kind of move toward the full-time employment of a site coordinator so that person can implement the model with all 3 tiers of support with fidelity. So you'll notice that the indicator of the standard, nothing has really changed there, but then we have some promising practices. And so this is where the promising practices are not requirements of the standard. Again, I repeat, they are not requirements of the standard, but they are things that you and your affiliate can think about and determine if that's something that it might work for you or is a good way to move forward as an affiliate. But you need to determine that for yourself. We're not saying that because we all know that our affiliates are different and they have come to have different circumstances and deal with different situations. But we simply are offering suggestions that can either be taken or not taken. That's what a suggestion is. So one of the suggestions is that, oh, sorry, Kevin, is that you might need, in order to reach 10% of school saturation, you might need more than one site coordinator at a school. And that is something for you as an affiliate to figure out if that's a strategy you want to take. We are not saying that you have to take it. We are just saying that it's something to consider because we know that some high schools are literally thousands of children. And so it's not appropriate for one person to be case managing, a school of 2,000 and case managing 200 kids, right? That's not going to work. And so a way to potentially meet saturation would be to have a few site coordinators in that school. That's just a suggestion, not a requirement. And that's the whole point of promising practices. They are suggestions. So the next one here. So school saturation. So before we get to school saturation, I do apologize. I missed a slide that I mentioned earlier and that I didn't put it in. So it's consent form 2.1. The only thing that has been changed with the consent form 2.1 is that DEI belief statement. And I want to just mention that we are not saying what your DEI belief statement needs to include or needs to be. That is absolutely something that you and your board and your affiliate and your all your stakeholders, your employees, you need to determine that for yourself. But we are saying that whatever that belief statement is should be included in your consent form so that parents of students who are receiving the services or who hope to receive the services know where you stand as an organization. So I just want to make that's been a change in the student support standard 2.1 consent form is that DEI belief statement. You do not, we provide a lot of guidance about what can be included or how you would go about creating a DEI belief statement, but that is for you to determine for yourselves. Okay, so let's talk about everybody's favorite standard to hate. School saturation, which is 2.4. So if you remember under TQS 2.0, we had 10% saturation for less than 1,000 students in a school. And then if it was 1,000 or more, it was 5%. And that really was not matching what our data is telling us. So our data is saying that in order to make school-wide change, which is the one of, the point of the model, right? The model is 3 tiers of support. And why do we have those tier 1s? It's to create some school-wide change. And in order to do that, you have to be case managing 10% of the student population, regardless of the school size. It does not change if you just have more students. You still need the case management at 10%. And as I alluded to earlier, as I mentioned earlier, that can be difficult if you have schools with thousands of children, and we recognize that, and we understand that is difficult. However, the data points us that this is the right direction to go in, and ergo, we are making that change from 5% to 10% across the board. So there will no longer be a distinction if you have more than 1,000 students or more at a school. So we, as I mentioned, we realize that that's hard, number one. Number two, we want to focus here on the indicators because we have tweaked them a little bit, and that's highlighted in yellow. So if you are not able to reach 10% saturation after we look at the data, you can actually provide us with as an executive director, as leadership in your organization, you can provide us with why that might not be happening. So a good example of this is we didn't go into a school until January or February of this year, and it was impossible to get 10% saturation by the time the end of the school came around in 4 months later in May. That's a very legitimate reason, and we want executive directors, we want affiliates to be able to tell their story, to be able to explain to us a little bit better, to kind of get to know you better as an affiliate and as an organization, about what kind of why you're doing the things that you're doing, and how we could maybe best support you with those strategies and those ideas moving forward. So that is why it's in yellow. It's a bit of a change. It is a change from the previous indicators. The promising practices here, again, promising practices are suggestions. They're things for you to think about. And we then have some suggestions here. And then the reason that they're highlighted in green is that they link to resources on the NRC, so that you can, kind of say, well, what are they talking about? And then you'll be able to click on it and link and go right to the resource. And so it might be, it's a suggestion, and we actually have heard that some states, the State Department of Education has specific mandates about how many students can be case managed by one site coordinator. And so we made a suggestion that you might need to, it might be good to only have 40 to 65 students on caseload. Now, again, this is just a suggestion. You might have more, you might have less. It's all about what works for you as an affiliate, and that's why it's a promising practice. Okay, so I think we talked about promising practices, and then this is just an example of periodic updates and external reports. So we used to have 4 standards about this. It was so many standards, and why do we have 4 separate standards about external reporting, periodic updates? So we just combine them all into one. So this is just an example of how we went from that, one of the examples of how we went from 20 student support standards to 16. We combined some standards. And so we took all of the 4s, 4.1 to 4.4, and we just said 4.1 is periodic updates and external reports. And so, we still anticipate that you are sharing with CIS leadership, with school leadership, and the school support team what you're working on at the school. We hope that that's happening. We also obviously want you to continue to complete end of year data, but there is no need to have 4 separate standards about that. And so we just have it as one standard. Again, the standard, the indicator, and then some promising practices that are included in that standard as well. Okay, so this is just an example. I was just on a fruit kick, I guess, the other day. So if you're like, I don't know how I'm going to reach this, 2 or 20% during reaccreditation, what is this? This is just an example of how to do that. So we have 6 schools here. I made up student population, site coordinator hours, and case management saturation rates. And so you can see that Apple Elementary and Dewberry Middle would meet the requirement because they both have 40 hours of site coordinator time, as well as they meet the 10% saturation. Now you're also like, oh man, Fig Elementary has 14%, but they only have 20 hours. That's correct. And what was the other one? One of the high schools, Cookie High School has the 40 hours, but it has only 6.7% because it's a larger school. And so you as an affiliate can say, okay, well, we meet the 2 requirements for model implementation. I don't think I'm on mute. Did I lose? No. Sorry, Manchas, you might be having issues with your audio. I think I'm okay though. So first of all, the Apple and Dewberry schools, that would be how you would meet the 2 model implementation requirements, with the other standards being met. And then looking at these schools, you can see that some of these schools are very close to either meeting saturation or to meeting the site coordination hours. And so this is a way where, again, we at National with your state office can work with you on how to get those up to meeting. But you can see here that of the 6 schools, only 2 are needed for the model implementation requirement for a reaccreditation year. So that's, I just want to reiterate. So it's 2 or 20%, whichever's greater. But this is as an example of how you would achieve that. There are still 4 other schools that don't either meet saturation or meet the site coordinator hours. And that's okay. This affiliate would still be reaccredited under that model implementation requirement because they have the 2. Okay. So the other thing that's important is that during reaccreditation, I want to emphasize during reaccreditation, which again, first reaccreditation cohort doesn't start until 2023, so we have some time. You can apply for an exemption. And an exemption is essentially when you as an organization do not feel that you can meet certain aspects of the standard and or the model implementation requirements. And you are allowed to apply for an exemption. As a part of the North Carolina network, you would work with your state office, specifically Heather, to apply for this exemption request. The exemption request would be filled out by Heather, but obviously with your input. And then we actually take that request in front of the governance committee, and the governance committee votes on either approving or not approving the exemption request. So very quickly, the exemption request can be found currently on the nonprofit operations section of the NRC and the CIS community. But again, you do not need to even, I mean, you could think about it, but you don't need to fill out anything until your reaccreditation year because exemption requests are specifically for reaccreditation. And the most important part here is that I want you to remember that this goes in front of a governance committee. So a lot of people, I really do feel, think that I just sit at home and make up standards and just say, you're accredited, you're not accredited, like as if it's, I don't know, a game or something. And that's really not the case. Kevin and I are simply working on behalf of the national and network leadership for this joint partnership of accreditation. We have a governance committee that's made up actually currently of 3 network folks. It was 4, 1 person retired, as well as 2 CIS national leadership folks. We're expanding that to up to 9 people with 7 from the network and 2 from CIS national. And that makes up that governance committee that votes on exemptions, accreditations, give input on standards, help affiliates when they're struggling. They are that committee that really focuses on everything pertaining to accreditation, hence their name, Accreditation Governance Committee. But remember that accreditation is a jointly owned process. And so it's something that because it's jointly owned, we want you and as well as national to work together in that ownership. So it's just something I always like. People think I have very strange hobbies, I guess, that I just sit at home and I'm just like, oh, standards. Anyway, so we are going to give you another example. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin and stop talking.
Sure. I just want to stop just for a moment because I know you're absorbing a lot of information right now about saturation and about full time and all those sorts of things. I will say I'm a big data nerd. So I went into North Carolina, all of your affiliates 2019 to 2020 data, just to look and see how would you have met these standards 2 years ago. We couldn't look at 20 to 21 because we're still in the EOI process. Basically, I think it was 22 affiliates at the time, there were 7 affiliates who sort of raised some red flags. So looking further into their data, 5 of those affiliates were simply just data errors. They had 0 hours entered for site coordinators. things like that, or they had 0 case managed students. So things that like, oh, it's probably just a mistake. These 5 affiliates would be fine. Of the 2 remaining affiliates, I believe they were small rural affiliates, people who would probably be prime examples of exemptions, right? You only have part-time site coordinators, things like that. So I think overall, at least in 2019, 2020, the North Carolina network really doesn't have anything to worry about. If you're still doing the same work, I think you'll be okay. But if you are concerned at all, obviously reach out to Julie and I. We'd be happy to look at your data, talk to you about what's going on with your affiliate. Maybe if an exemption is needed. Okay, so let's talk about sort of this new 5-year cycle that we're looking at. So again, this is very network driven. On that survey that we sent out to executive directors, most people said, hey, 3 years is too often. Can we move to 5 years? And of those people, 55% said 5 years, but we want some checkpoints in between. So what we came up with is this 5-year cycle with an annual risk management assessment. So what is this going to look like in practice? So let's say I'm a brand new affiliate, CIS of Honolulu. Kevin's going to have to go out there at least every 2 or 3 months to do site visits, I think. But for initial accreditations, things are going to look pretty much the same. We're going to look at all your standards. We're going to do a site visit, things like that. If you are already accredited under TQS 2.0, you are still considered accredited under the new standards. You don't have to go through an initial accreditation again. So I believe everybody on this call is already accredited, so no worries about that. So that means you'll be put right into, everybody gets a trip. I think the whole North Carolina network just needs to swing out to Honolulu real quick. So after you've been accredited or gone through your reaccreditation, you'll go through the annual risk management assessment, which happens every year, annual. And it looks at those standards that were ranked the highest risk standards by that committee. So those are things that could really, if they slip up for even just a year, they could potentially shut an affiliate down. So what we're looking at is things like your insurance coverage, a lot of financial things, budget audit, your Form 990, obviously that's super important. And then some things in SISM, in the data system, like your parent guardian consents, your background checks, things like that. We'll talk about more on that in a second. So once you've sort of entered the 5-year cycle, you'll do ARMA for 4 years, and then you'll do reaccreditation in your 5th year. This still includes doing the ARMA process, and it also includes looking at those standards that we haven't looked at since your initial accreditation or your last reaccreditation. One of the new things we're really trying to do is, let's say you haven't changed your board bylaws in the last 5 years. We're not going to ask you to see your board bylaws again. We're not going to ask you to dig out the board meeting minutes where those things were approved. So we're trying to streamline. If things haven't changed since the last reaccreditation, we're not going to ask you to evidence those things. So hopefully that really streamlines this process quite a bit. We also think that after going through ARMA for 4 years, it should really be a breeze after maybe 2 or 3 years. You should really have a good feel for it. You should be in a good place, and that should be pretty easy to just glide on through those things. So we're hoping that the overall lift of reaccreditation is greatly reduced. So more on the annual risk management assessment, ARMA. I'm going to keep saying ARMA. Hopefully that doesn't confuse anybody too much. So when looking at these high-risk standards, the 4 items in the left column are going to be things that you'll provide evidence of on an annual basis. So we'll want to see proof that you have adequate insurance coverage. Financial monitoring, one example of the evidence there is proof that you paid your payroll taxes. We'll ask for your budget and some other financial documents, and we'll ask for your audit or your financial review every year. The theme that I hope you're seeing here is that these are things you're already doing, right? Hopefully you're already paying your payroll taxes. Hopefully you already have a budget every year. You're doing an audit every year, those sorts of things. So really, we're just going to ask you to upload these things. It's not new work that we're creating for you, just an upload. The items in the right-hand column, if you are doing these things in system, we at the national office will just be able to go and jump into system again if you're doing these things in system. Or like for your Form 990, we'll just go to your website. 990 is up to date. And then for the data items, we'll just jump in the system if they're there and make sure that you have all your parent guardian consents, all of your background checks are up to date, things like that. And this is all, hopefully, we're trying to make all of this coincide with EOI, and we're also trying to manage this whole process in the CIS community, sort of a one-stop shop where you can go find the standards, find resource for the standards, and then upload items for the standards. So we're hoping to make this a really, really smooth sort of all in process. With the annual risk management assessment, the reason I think that, after a few years, this will be really smooth is because we're very committed to providing feedback on all the things that you're uploading. I used to do reporting to the state. I worked for a university doing accreditation stuff, and there's nothing worse than doing annual reporting and then just like, nobody tells you, was it good? Was it bad? Did you get my email? So we're going to provide you with feedback on a color-coded system. Green, on each standard, you'll get green, yellow, or red. Green means you're doing a great job, keep up the good work. Yellow means there's some sort of minor concern. Maybe you could just improve your budgeting practices, for example, something like that. You'll be provided with very specific feedback and resources to improve. These might be things that are on CISU, they might be on the NRC. Maybe we can connect you to another affiliate who sort of went through maybe a similar growth that you're going through. Or maybe it's just letting your point of contact at the national office know that this is something they need help with. Continue to have conversations with them over the next year. So we're very committed to giving you not only feedback, but also ways to sort of improve. Red means there's a major concern. You don't have, your Form 990 is out of date. You didn't do an audit last year. This is when we would hit the brakes and say, okay, we need to remediate this thing immediately because this poses a major risk to your organization. We'd like to get that fixed now. So fix it and then move on. You'll be good to go.
And I just want to reiterate what Kevin was mentioning. Sorry, Kevin, should always be talking about standards and risk. But what we have seen is that, the audits, the budget issues, those are things that shut affiliates down, and that we don't want that to happen, which is why we are including those in an annual risk management assessment. So, it's really our way of hopefully helping affiliates if they are struggling.
These all, I'm relatively new here to communities and schools, but for each one of these standards, I guarantee you that Julie or Dana Smith or, any of these folks have been around for a while. They have a story about, oh, well, this affiliate, they didn't do a budget for 3 years or something like that. So this is all very real stuff. Julie, I'll kick it back to you to talk about sort of the timeline for implementation of all this.
Great. So this is our timeline of our new process. So just again, so that a little bit of behind the curtain here at CIS National, we actually have our Student Supports Committee of the National Board approve the standards. So they approved those standards in July of 2021, which is why it's really unfair if they only approved them in July for us to release them out into the network in August of 2021 and say, ta-da, they're implemented for this year. So again, that is why the standards are not implemented for 21-22. They will not go into effect for this school year because they didn't get approved until just weeks, literally, before many starts of the school year. So we are kind of finalizing our network engagement. As I mentioned, we've given this presentation in various forms to various groups across the network, and we're continuing to do so. We actually have meetings with some other state networks later on in this month. And so what we're really hoping to do, obviously, during these presentations is, number one, kind of assess your worries and your concerns, answer any questions that you have, know that you have somebody, you have 2 emails at the national office, as well as I know that you have a great state office, but I'm just saying you have 2 other people. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please reach out. And we do have our info at the end of this presentation for you to jot down our emails. So that's one of our goals, right, is to ensure that we're kind of all feeling good about this new process and that we are answering questions and concerns as they come up ahead of when we're actually implementing. Another one of our goals here with the network engagement is to roll out the standards. So if you receive the community briefing, hopefully you saw that they are now live on the NRC, which you access via the CIS community, via your login. And Kevin has done a wonderful job of resources. So there's tons of resources in them. So all you have to do is go to the standard, you click on the green link, whichever standard it is, and it will take you right to that resource. And as we continue talking to our network, learning more, we will be adding more resources. And that's the cool thing about the document, is that the standards themselves won't change, but some of the links might change to better inform you all. So we're going to continue with that throughout the fall of 2021. We are piloting our annual assessment next summer for every organization that is affiliated with CIS. This is a pilot. So what we're really hoping to do, as Kevin mentioned, we're hoping it's in the CIS community. So it's a pretty easy upload of those, 4 or 6 documents, depending upon whether you practice certain procedures in or out of SISDM. Secondly, it is to monitor and adjust our process so that when we a year later do ARMA again, as well as the first full cohort, we are better prepared for you all and we can better respond as national. And so because of that pilot, we anticipate that in the late winter to early spring of 2022, we'll be kind of releasing webinars and tools and templates and things like that to help you through the ARMA process. As Kevin mentioned, we are very dedicated to responding to everyone who goes through ARMA, and so we anticipate that would take up summer and fall of next year. Again, as I mentioned, monitoring and adjusting our processes from a national perspective where needed, and then we would kind of roll out the first cohort in the summer of 2023. If you're wondering, am I in the first cohort? What does that look like? I went through in 2017. Is it assumed I'm going through in 2023? All those questions will be answered. So first of all, no, it is not assumed that you are automatically slated for the first cohort if you went through in 2017. That's not true. One of the nice things about having 5-year cohorts is that the cohorts are smaller, which means that we automatically need to move some folks around anyway. But also it means that we hopefully can give you, the folks going through accreditation during that year a little bit more more attention because there are less of you. And we can better help you through the process. We will be releasing, actually Heather, coming your way probably in the next 2 weeks, is going to be a schedule. We of course put that schedule in front of all of our states first, state leadership, and then once we talk it over with them, we will be sharing it with the network at large. So that's going to be coming up. We do hope to have that finalized end of this calendar year, beginning of next calendar year. So, latest January 2022. So you will have then that full year and a half. If you are in the 2023 cohort, you would have some good ramp up time there. I think that's it as far as the timeline. Am I missing anything? I don't think so. Just 2 points on the ARMA. Yeah, this is good. This slide's good. As Kevin mentioned, giving you feedback is really important. And I do somewhat see it for those of you who are the EDs in the room who went through the reaccreditation calls. So the reaccreditation calls we would set up usually an hour time. I don't think that it would take as much with ARMA, just simply because there aren't as many standards. But it would be, having that conversation with you and potentially your board about where you are, so that, we can give you some feedback and tools and templates and things to kind of help support you however you need support. So the next step, so we'll get to our little poll in a moment. There's really nothing to do right now other than participate in our little chat poll. As I mentioned, you'll be alerted in late 21 or early 22 as to your reaccreditation year cohort. And then I also mentioned the spring 2022 webinar on the annual risk management assessment. But we do hope that, throughout this process, again, you kind of see that we are really focusing now on risk mitigation. We are trying to have better checkpoints with our affiliates on high risk areas so that we can help you through difficult times if they were to come your way. And then lastly, that, we really want to be that partner with you and your organization throughout this process. So please just be as communicative as possible, as we will be communicative with you. And then the last thing is just any questions, but also our emails, which are probably coming up. Yeah, there we are. So that's what we look like in real life. So I'm happy to answer any questions for you all. And yes, please put in the poll how you're feeling, if you're feeling better or worse. But yeah, we're happy, Kevin and I are both happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Julie and Kevin. I just wanted to say too, you guys are awesome, or you both are awesome. And I wanted to let everybody know, if you're new to this process, I am here at the state office that will be working with you along the way. So you're not alone in this. You will not be going through reaccreditation or ARMA without me. So just know that we'll walk hand in hand together through that, and more information to come. But we'll start working on the ARMA requirements soon, once we get through the impact conference and get, I'm going to have a little vacation next week, but I will be in touch with everyone about ARMA. We will get this presentation. Always, please let me know if you have any questions. Julie and Kevin are great partners in this work, so we're all in this together. And I'm going to put the feedback if you can provide feedback on the session. I've put that link in the chat box if you can fill that out for us. We do want to get our evaluations done, and we thank Julie and Kevin for their time.
Thank you all. And yeah, again, if there are any questions now on the call, or if you need to, I'm a processor, so I always have like questions like 3 hours after the fact. I'm like, I need to follow up. Please follow up. I really do like talking about standards.
Julie and I are weird like that. Thank you.
No one has questions. I'm shocked.
Yeah, I know.
It was so thorough. It was very thorough.
So yeah, when I just FYI, because I when I send the presentation, I'll just put that consent form slide in as well. Just missed it. I talked about it, but I missed it, so that'll be included.
Ashley from Charlotte Mecklenburg. I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
Can you remind me, well, first, let me back up. Thank you both for being here today. It was very informative. Can you remind me where to find some of this information in the resource center?
Sure. So the standards themselves, all of the standards, like both business and student support, are under nonprofit operations if you search for standards. We, however, also broke out the student support standards, and those should be under the student supports section of the NRC if you, again, search for standards. I also believe if you do a search of everything on the NRC and just search for standards, you will eventually be able to find them. It's just that it's going to pull up a few more results, but they are the accreditation standards, and you should be able to find them that way. And then, as I mentioned, when you bring them up and you open them in your browser, when you scroll through and you're like, oh, like this is highlighted in green and there's a hyperlink. If you click that hyperlink, it just takes you to a new another resource. So the resources are right there within the standards themselves. And if there isn't a hyperlink, but something is highlighted green, there should be at the top of the standards a note saying that those links are coming. We just we are still kind of gathering all the resources. So
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. That was easy. Was that your question?
It was. I mean, I can think of a few if you give me a few times. Hey, Julie, what's your sign? What's your sign? I don't have any other questions. That's all I had.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. If nobody else has any questions, make sure you fill out the feedback form on evaluation that I put the link in the chat. And thank you all for joining. It was good to see you all. And thanks again to Julie and Kevin. And we'll see you back at noon for Danya Perry.
Thank you, everybody. Take
Thanks
care.
for having us.
Bye, thanks. Have a good day.
Hi, everybody.